So we were out to dinner with my best friend who was Julie in the movie, and she brought up Wanho, and I had not thought about him, I don't know, in probably 30 years. And we were just talking about him and laughing, and Mike was really interested in the story. And then he was like, this would make a great movie.
Here we go. We're here for the Q&A of a delightful film called The Legend of Juan Jose Mundo. I'm here with the film's director and screenwriter. We have Mr. Michael Walker, who directed the film, and we have Susan Gomes, who wrote the film. I believe the screenplay was a collaboration between you two.
Yep.
Yeah. Wonderful. Okay, then, Susan, this is inspired by a time in your life. Can you give us a little bit more detail about the process of coming up with this story, called from almost like an oral history of stuff that happened in White Plains in the fall of 1984?
So we were out to dinner with my best friend who was Julie in the movie, and she brought up Wanho, and I had not thought about him, I don't know, in probably 30 years. And we were just talking about him and laughing, and Mike was really interested in the story. And then he was like, this would make a great movie. So it happened that we were writing it during COVID, and
Yeah.
it was such a good time to be reaching out to people from high school because everybody was so disparate and at home and alone and scared. And it was such a good time to talk to people and reminisce and hear stories. And the script really is just it's a bunch of stories from my high school. I mean, it's about Wanho and it's about Julie and it's about a girl's coming of age, really. But then all these other stories are real. You know, the advice that the brother gives about what, guys just want sex and all the locations. Like I worked in a ski shop and it's just all based on my life. It's very cool.
Yeah, we did also have Julie's perspective on this. I mean, her real name's not Julie, but we did have her perspective on this a lot. We had her yearbooks. We had, we had at the end of the movie, they have, there's a Spanish yearbook that, a little bit of a scrapbook of her trip to Spain. And that's hers that I just, I used some of that.
Working on this together may have led to maybe some disagreements as to how the story would should go. Can you tell me a little bit about that creative process?
I would say we were always in sync. Or even if we weren't, it was a discussion and it would usually lead to something better.
Okay.
Yeah, we had the best time shooting it and writing it. We had a great time, and then shooting it was really great for us too. But yeah, there were things that like there's the scene where she runs into the bathroom and takes out all the girl stuff from there. I probably would have cut that scene out if it was up to me.
Yeah.
But
But it's also for us when we do
right.
stuff together, it's like a family affair with friends and family. And so like my brother is the gym teacher. And he's an actor-ish. He's not really an actor, he's a business guy, but that was like the little sister's revenge. If you want to be in the script, we're gonna write a part for you. And so you know what happened there.
In terms of the palette of the film, it feels like a faded postcard almost. Can you go into how, Michael, how you work with your DP and the production designer to come up with the look of the film?
Well, we tried to, we had certain films that we referenced, but it was mostly just the idea of how films were shot back then. She tried to light it as much as we could with lights that would have been used back then. Now everybody uses LEDs, so it's definitely a certain look, and it's a harder thing to do. We referenced, there's a few shots in there that are referenced to 80s movies. We used lenses that they would use, just back then they sort of tended to use a certain kind of lens that we tried to stick to as much as we could, and things like that. But then we also wanted it to be, unique to its own story, and also there are limits of the budget that we had to, I sort of came up with a style that would sort of work with the budget too.
Which were washing streets and putting smoke and
Yeah, yeah.
like real 80s.
80s that, like they did it, they started doing this thing in the 80s where they would wet streets down at night because they would get a nice glisten on the streets to get some light off the streets. So we tried to do things like that, and we tried to, there was a shot in the hot tub where there's some steam, and there's smoke behind, some colors in the steam. Like that is very 80s. Any movie you see in the 80s would have some steam in it and some colored lights in it. It's very specific to 1984, which I feel like 1984 was a time when the 80s hadn't really become the 80s yet. It was still a little bit of the 70s. So the muted colors that you're talking about, it's before everything really became, those light blues and pinks and neons and things like that. And the hair, it was bad, but it hadn't really become its own thing yet. So, there was trying to stay specific to that time and not, well, when most people make a film in the 80s, they're like, yes, I want that hair and I want the colors and I want this. And I want it to be, like you said, more specific and more realistic in that way.
Let's talk about the interiors because I think that's something that also really stands out for me. In particular, the wallpaper and the wood paneling.
Well, like I said, we had Susan there, and
We had photos of all the basements that we hung out in, and they had this whole wall up at American High where we shot that it was endless of photos. And they had, they just took those as actual reference points. They even got wallpaper from 1984, from the 80s, like Laura Ashley for Suzanne's room. I was like, you guys are unbelievable.
they did that, and there's like little things like the Lorraine bottle cover.
Who?
Lorraine,
Oh,
like
written perfume. Like this was
Oh,
cute.
yeah, takes me back.
Yeah, so she mentioned
Remember Ralph Lauren?
Who remembers that out there? Raphael
Yes,
and
I
perfume.
do. I had
My
my
dear,
polo.
it smells like polo. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
special all those. Yeah.
So she had mentioned that perfume. I actually put that in the script, and they found a bottle of it, so it's in the movie. So there's a lot of little details like that came from our discussion. I mean, we talked about this. It took us a few years to get this going, so we talked about it forever, and we really tried to get those details right.
That's a really key, I think, to the film. Why the film is so charming is that you cast these leads that just feel like someone you'd know, someone you may have known in the past. How did it come to meet Anna and Alexandro and all the people for your leads for the cast?
Yeah, they all auditioned. I mean, they were all from all over the place. Anna was from Canada, and she hadn't done very much. She'd done a couple little TV things and some small parts of movies, but she hadn't done anything. But she had this quality, and there were a lot of good actresses that were coming for them, but she just had this quality that was so special. So it was really hard to get her. She had to get a special visa coming from Canada, and even though it was a couple of years ago, it was still really hard to get. So she didn't actually show up on set until the day we started shooting.
Wow.
And
It was scary.
and Alex, who plays Juanho, was in Atlanta. He just graduated University of Michigan, and
Actually, he had graduated 2 years ago and had been working in a steakhouse and had kind of felt like, I don't know if this is gonna happen. He'd gotten really far auditioning for Lin-Manuel Miranda and just wasn't happening. And then
he was so great in the film. And since then he's in the Descendants movie that's coming out.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's he went from our movie to $100 million Disney movie.
So another thing that struck me in terms of your screenplay is that you really dive into, and almost you lean into making the viewer confront how things were different back then versus the way they are today. I guess the most striking example is the interracial couple. Was that an important thing for you guys to really include in your screenplay? Not just tell the story, but also explore this period, and take it's a pretty unvarnished way. I mean, a lot of films from the 80s, they kind of soft pedal the misogyny and the racism, but your film does not.
Yeah, I think it does a little bit. I mean, like we laid off a little bit, like but I think it's amazing how things have changed. I think if we had, especially like the homophobia, that sort of randomly gets talked about. Back
Very
then,
casual,
the way
yeah.
people talked, and it was like, so I wouldn't have been I would have felt it was disingenuous to make a movie about the 80s and not include some of that, As far as the interracial couple, that was based loosely on a true story of Susan. So
yeah, I think the whole thing was important to keep real. Like your shirt, Amy Heckerling, like for me, Fast Times at Ridgemont High was my favorite movie because it was so real about a girl's, the first time she had sex. It was, it was painful to watch that in that movie.
Yeah.
And I think, a lot of the movies from the 80s, like even the John Hughes movies were very sort of idealized and sweet. And And we wanted some of that, but we wanted it to be what happens for real for a girl. Like so many of those movies that we saw in the 80s were about boys and their first time having sex. And it was just sort of like, another notch in their belt. But we all wanted something else. We were hoping for some kind of romance, some kind of love. And, neither Suzanne or Julie is really getting it. But the one person that was, the interracial couple. It was,
that was another idea of that, is that they have this perfect couple, but they're
they
divided by their race.
Romeo and Juliet, they're kept apart. But I mean, that's what both girls really want. They just want to be loved.
I also want to talk about the cultural differences in terms of that dinner scene where Juan Jose pours the red wine that he brought in, and you could tell there was a pause in the table. The Jewish Democratic parents were kind of like, like, okay, we need to accept these cultural differences.
I didn't actually grow up in White Plains, so I grew up I grew up in Miami, but I went to high school in England at a boarding school, so I had a very different experience. But I did have an experience of going over to England in the early '80s, and there was a much bigger cultural divide than there is now, maybe between Europe or Spain and then. So I just sort of and then also the way that the Julie in the movie, the way it was explained to me, how the Spanish kids had the sophistication that American kids didn't have. They would have a glass of wine with their teacher after school, and obviously American kids couldn't drink, and they definitely wouldn't have drank with their teachers, and they would have just drank a lot. So there was these cultural differences that I just wanted to make sure came through like that.
Yeah.
In an '80s kind of way too. I think now there's a much they watch American TV in Spain in a way that they didn't back then. It was just coming out of Franco and things like that. Try to remember those things.
You guys were there in the 80s, right? And you went to see these films, this John Hughes movies, right? But now there's like a whole new breed of rom-coms and coming of age stories coming out. What in those decades since, what have been the changes that you've noticed, and what's better? What do you think has been a step backwards for you?
I mean, for me, like, what I think makes our film different than a lot of the other films is there's emotional honesty to it that I think a lot of films don't have these days, that are, the kids' films or young adult, people with young adults. And it does have a perspective from people who are older, which I think makes it a little different too. So, but I think
I think there's a level of like over dramatization now also of everything, which takes away from the realness of it, as opposed to just, this is sort of how it is and how it was. And everything just seems so either really heightened or just really kind of like knock you on the head with a joke every second.
I know a lot of the streaming services require that you repeat things from the stuff in the plot. So in case people watching are doing other things, so they can actually keep the thread going. What's your take on that?
I grew up on movies and I love movies, and I was a snob to TV forever, and TV has sort of taken over everybody's life, and it's harder to be a snob about TV than it was. But I still think there's an influence of TV that's come into movies that has not been beneficial to movies, and that goes everything that you said plus other things too. The cinematic language is kind of gone, repeating things, saying how you feel instead of just feeling it, situations, quality of the writing and everything.
I was wondering who would connect with this film, because it clearly could theoretically appeal to the younger audience, the ones who are 16, 15 and 16 and 17 today. But it would also really appeal to those who are 15, 16, 17 in the 80s, right? So when you wrote it, did you write it with and when you were shooting it, do you write with someone in mind in terms of your target audience, or no?
Ourselves.
No, we like it. That's good. But I mean, having taken it to festivals, I think you're exactly right. Those are the people who like it the most. They're the people
45 and older, anybody that lived through the 80s.
and the ones that are and the teenagers now.
I mean, after every screening, invariably people come up to us of our generation and are just like, I loved it, and going over memories they have. We've actually been in one screening where a husband and wife came up, and she was an exchange student in the 80s, and they ended up getting married.
I think your question is like, yeah, we didn't write it with an audience in mind. And, I mean, it's very occasional. I'll be like, if I'm writing a script, I'll be, God, no one wants to see this. But generally I wait till I put it out in the world and then I realize nobody wants to see it.
I think we should actually address that, Susan, you had a on-screen part in this film. Can you talk about that acting for Michael?
I was in it twice, actually. I don't know if anybody will catch my cameo, but I was the ski shop woman and I was at the disco.
I mean, for me, the biggest financial challenge was to get some extras because it wasn't just finding an extra. You had to dress them and you had to, everything. So that became really challenging. So we all did what we could.
You weren't in it.
I wasn't in it.
No, I wasn't in it.
In terms of location, now you mentioned the nightclub. Where was that shot? That sequence?
The whole movie was shot in Syracuse, New York, and that was a club in Syracuse that we decked out to make it as 80s as we could.
Were there any exteriors that were shot in New York City or all Syracuse?
All Syracuse. Everything was Syracuse. The New York Times we shut down. I mean, the Times Square scene in the city was shot in Syracuse. We shut down a street and decked it out as 80s as we could.
Is there anything you want to add for people who are viewing this film, in terms of what you wanted them to come away with?
I wanted to have a sort of special look into this past. It's almost like you're looking through one of those old machines like that and you see this special world and something touches you, and I feel like there's, when I was writing the script, I would have these emotional reactions to it too, or when we were writing the script and I'm happy when I see that work in an audience, so I hope it worked on the screening here.
Yeah. And even, I don't think anything just to walk away with it and not think, oh, this was just some silly movie, but there's a lot of real emotions in there and there's a lot of real thoughts about growing up and about, best friends and about just life and who you were back then. And I hope that people walk away feeling something.